Now, when you look at most to-do list apps out there, it's very rare that you'll come across a to-do list that only has a single list. But unfortunately, that's currently all that we've got. Most to-do list apps will have categories. So for example, cleaning, bills, miscellaneous, grocery, and you'll be able to tap on them to view those lists. And this allows us to classify and categorize so that we can organize our to-do list items in a more logical way. So that's also a good feature for us to add to our To-Doey app. And in order to implement it, we'll get to learn all about relationships and how we set them up using core data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make some UI changes. At the moment, we've got a single table view controller that is embedded inside a navigation controller. Now, in order for us to have a category screen, then we need to drag on another table view controller. So I'm going to place that between the navigation controller and our to-do list items table view controller. Then I'm going to delete this link between the navigation controller and the to-do list controller because this link specifies which is the root view controller, i.e. if you have a navigation stack, like a stack of cards, what is the controller that's at the bottom of the stack? And when you say something like pop to root view controller, that's equivalent to the first screen that's embedded in the navigation stack. So let's go ahead and click on this link and delete it. And then I'm going to replace this category view controller in between our navigation controller and our to-do list view controller. And then I'm going to click on the navigation controller. So I get this little yellow button here, and I'm going to control drag it to point it towards our brand new table view controller. And instead of using show or creating a segue, instead I'm going to create a relationship segue and specify that this is now the root view controller, because we first have to see the category table view, and only then can we select one of the categories to take us to all the items that are classified under that category. So that means we also need to set up a segue between our category and our to-do list items by control dragging. And in this case, we're going to go for a show segue. And if you remember, every single time we set up a segue, we also have to specify an identifier. So we'll just call this go to items. And we currently now have this free floating table view because it doesn't have a view controller class that's associated with it. So let's go ahead and create a new one. And instead of creating a new Swift file, we want a new Cocoa Touch class. So hit next. And this is going to be a subclass of UI table view controller because we want all of that freebie code that comes with it. And then we're going to call this class the category view controller. Make sure language is selected as Swift and hit next. And then we're going to save it inside the controllers folder or group and making sure that it targets our To-Doey app. And then we're going to hit create, and we now have a category view controller. So I'm actually going to drag that on top so that it makes more sense, because we first go to category, then we go to the to-do list for each category. So now if we go back to our main.storyboard, we can specify the Swift file that is going to be responsible for managing this particular view. So if you don't do this step, and you head over to the assistant editor, when you select the to-do list item view controller, you see that under automatic, we've got to-do list view controller.swift. But when you select this new table view controller that currently is not associated with any Swift class, then you can see that under automatic, you only get a UI table view controller file. And this is also not a Swift file. This is actually an Objective-C header file. So that's not what we want because we can't link up our outlets and we can't do anything. So we have to specify the identity of this view controller. And inside the custom class, we're going to say category view controller and hit enter. So now automatically our assistant editor has updated to the corresponding class with our view controller. Before we leave the main.storyboard is we want to give this prototype cell a identifier. So select the prototype cell either on the canvas or select it in the document outline, but we're going to call it category cell and hit enter. So now that we've got our view and our class linked up, we can now create a add button or bar button item rather, and we can drag it to the top right corner of this new view controller. And again, this is going to be a system item of add, and we're going to change the tint to white. This is going to allow us to add new categories to this table view so that we can organize our to-do list. And once you've done that, we're going to control drag over to our category view controller.swift file, and we're going to create a new IB action. And this IB action is going to be called add button pressed, and it's going to be of type UI bar button item. And hit enter. And the last thing I'm going to do here is select the navigation item here, and I'm going to give it a title called To-Doey. And then I'm going to change the title here to items. And that is all we need to do inside the main.storyboard. So let's head over to the category view controller. And the first thing I want to do is when you set up a new CocoaTouch class that subclasses UI table view, you get a whole bunch of free code, but you also get a lot of comments. And, we're now pro enough with table views to not need all of this help and guidance. So I'm going to delete all of this code up until view did load. And then I'm also going to delete all the comments inside view did load. That cleans up our view controller a little bit and allows us to work on it without all of this distraction. So now that we've set up our view and our controller, we're going to go and figure out what we're going to do with our data model. So up till now, we've been editing our entities and attributes under this table view format, but you can also switch to the graph view. And this presents each entity and all of their attributes as a little table. And for those guys who've been working with databases, then this might seem quite familiar to you. So it's under this format that we're going to add a new entity. And this new entity is going to be called category. And once you hit enter, then you'll see this new table show up that's called category, which has no attributes and no relationship. If you select the category entity and click add attribute, then you're going to get a new attribute. And we can click on it to modify its properties inside the data model inspector in the right-hand pane here. Now, for some reason, I have no idea why, the icon for it is like a little welding mask, but some designer somewhere thought that this was a good idea to represent a data model. But hey, let's not argue with Apple designers, right? Okay, so we're going to change the attribute name to be called name, and this is going to refer to the name of each category that we're going to add. And we're going to make the name non-optional, so it has to have a value for it to go into our data model. And you'll see this little error here, and it won't go away until you change the attribute type from undefined. It cannot be undefined. It must be specified. And our name for the category is, of course, going to be a string. And once you do that, then Xcode is all happy with you and all the errors go away. Now, in addition to having a single attribute for the category, we're also now going to set up a relationship between our category and our item entities. And to do that, all you need to do is control drag from category to item, and now you have a relationship. Now, it's not very useful having a relationship called new relationship, so we need to rename that. So click on it, and that'll allow us to edit it in the data model inspector. We're going to change the name to something that makes sense. So each category can be associated with many items, right? If you have a category called shopping list, then you might have 10 item objects that refer to all the things you need to buy. So we can call this relationship items because that's essentially what it's referring to. And we should change the type from to one to too many because each category can have many items associated with it. Now, the inverse relationship refers to what would you call the category that the item is associated with? And that should probably be called the parent category. And each item can only have one parent category. So this type should remain as to one. It would be really confusing if each of your items have two categories. Say, your buy milk belongs in shopping list as well as another category. That doesn't make any sense logically. So we've now created a new entity called category, and we've also started creating our graph, which specifies how categories relate to items. And this might be a good time to remind yourself of when we first started talking about databases in this module, when we were talking about our bakery having a products table, a buyers table, and an orders table. And in order to manage all of the complex data, we need to set up these relationships. So now, when we create a new category, we can link it with many item NS managed objects. And every single item object, we can look up its parent category. So this now gives us access to more complex things that we can do with our data, including setting up this new view controller and having a whole bunch of categories that each have their individual to-do lists. Now, all we need to do is head back to our category view controller, and we need to set up some code to use our data model. So in order to do that, we'll need to import core data, and we'll also need to have some table view data source methods, as well as table view delegate methods. And then we'll need some data manipulation methods. So I think you're probably getting the hint. I'm not going to do this for you. I want you, as a challenge, to think back to what we did inside our to-do list view controller, how we set up an array of items, how we tapped into the context that we're going to use, and then how we set up our table view to load our data from the context for all of those items. And then we used our IB action, add button pressed, to add new items into our table view. And then we used the save items function to persist that items inside our container. And then we loaded those items from our persistent container using our context. Now I want you to complete this challenge and be able to set up our category view controller in a similar way to what we did with items, to use our core data model, and to be able to add new categories and to be able to show those categories inside our table view. So all you need to do is set up the data source so that we can display all the categories that are inside our persistent container. Set up the data manipulation methods, namely save data and load data, so that we can use CRUD. And finally, to set up the add button pressed IB action in order to add new categories using our categories entity. And the part that I want you to leave for now is the table view delegate methods. So that refers to what should happen when we click on one of the cells inside the category table view. So I know that these challenges are getting more and more challenging, but if you've come this far and you've followed along with everything that we've been talking about with core data, this is a good time to really test to see if you understood the concepts and use what you learned to set up your very own table view controller that has a persistent data store using core data. And if you have completed the challenge successfully, then you should end up with a blank table view with the title TODOING, and you should be able to click on the add button to add new categories to your table view. And when you double click on the home button and terminate your app, now I really recommend you to give it a go yourself. And it might require quite a bit of struggling, but struggle is good. And once you struggle through it and get it to work by yourself, then you'll feel this immense sense of achievement. But if you do get stuck and you do have any issues, then you can always head over to the next lesson where I will walk you through how we can do this. So pause the video and give it a go now. I'll see you on the other side.